Hello, my friends. This is Lloyd Albritton. Just briefly, let me just tell you that I'm posting a story. My podcast is entitled Lloyd's Commentaries and Stories. So this is going to be a story I'm going to post for you today because it's Halloween, and ghosts and goblins and all that. This is a little story that I wrote many years ago for a magazine over in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, called Old Southern Times. It's a totally fictional story, and so I'm going to just do it as a narrated, as a read text, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So it's entitled Bessie Kemp's Old Store. Now let me just tell you this: it's, as I said, it is a fictional story, although as many of my stories are taken from my own experiences and with some fact. The fact is, there was an old store out in Nokomis. My father used to point it out to me when I was a little boy. We would drive by, and he said, "That's Miss Bessie Kemp. That's Miss Bessie Kemp's old store." And he told me stories about Miss Bessie Kemp. That's C-A-M-P. I changed the name to Kemp in the story, but Miss Bessie Kemp was the lady's name, and he said she used to own that old store out there, and he told me about her carrying the holster and the big gun, the shoulder holster, and that Miss Bessie Kemp shot a guy one time, protecting the mail. They had a little country, it was a mail depository. So that's what I spun the story from, the death of her son and the ghost and all that. It's all fictional story, but I did use Miss Bessie Kemp's name as Bessie Kemp. And again, the story is fictional. So if you remember the old store or you remember Miss Kemp, please don't confuse her. This never happened to her. And so anyway, read and enjoy. And I'll be posting probably a couple of more this month of kind of ghost stories that I have in my repertoire. Thank you so much. Thanks for visiting Lloyd's Commentaries and Stories. Bessie Kemp's Old Store. In the summer of 1934, Bessie Kemp killed a man, a vagrant who had broken into her house in Nokomis, Alabama, in the middle of the night. It was determined afterward that it was not Bessie Kemp's house the man was intending to break into, but the small grocery store which occupied the front portion of the house. In the year of 1934, the entire nation was in the middle of the Great Depression, and the roads and railways were filled with jobless drifters who occasionally resorted to stealing food and when things got bad enough. It was dark inside the house, and somehow, whether by accident or on purpose, we'll never know, the intruder made his way into the living quarters occupied by Bessie and her 16-year-old son, Lamar. The man's presence awoke Lamar, who leaped out of bed and tackled him to the floor. The ensuing fracas awoke Bessie, who grabbed a loaded 12-gauge shotgun, which she kept leaning against the wall beside her bed, and ran to her son's aid. Pulling open the window curtain to allow some light to come in from the moon, Bessie quickly sized up the situation and hollered out for Lamar to kick the man away so that she could shoot him. Lamar, a big boy, who had not missed too many meals despite the Great Depression, already had the emaciated man bested and easily got both feet up against his belly and boosted him clean across the room, whereupon Bessie blasted the man with 2 barrels of double-aught buckshot. The man was never identified, and the sheriff hauled what was left of him off on the back of his flatbed pickup truck to be buried in the local pauper's graveyard without the benefit of a casket or grave marker of any kind. Bessie Kemp was in her early 40s at the time of the shooting. The years had blessed her with a good appetite and a robust profile, which she disguised with an assortment of indistinguishable sack dresses. She wore her salt and pepper hair pulled sternly back and tied into a bun. Bessie took no pains whatsoever to make herself more attractive to the opposite sex. Friends occasionally suggested to her that she consider getting married again, especially after the shooting incident. But Bessie was a practical, independent woman, and she felt entirely capable of taking care of herself and her son without the help of a man. Bessie had opened the little grocery store shortly after her husband, Eugene, was killed when the mule he was plowing got spooked and ran away with him. Eugene had foolishly wrapped the plow reins around his wrist, and after being dragged some distance across the field without serious injury, he hit his head on a tree trunk at the edge of the woods. Eugene was dead by the time Bessie saw the dusty ruckus out back through her kitchen window and had to run out to help him. Surprisingly, Bessie had done very well on her own after Eugene's death, even better, in fact, than in any of the 18 years she had been married to him. She saw no need to take on another husband. Several months following this shooting incident, a local post office was established at Bessie's store to service the residents of Nokomis. Naturally, Bessie was appointed the new postmaster. Taking her new responsibilities and the added income opportunities seriously, Betty took to carrying a long-barrel .45 caliber six-shooter in a wide leather shoulder holster. Her reputation as a fearless defender of her home and properties grew exponentially following the shooting of the anonymous intruder. The big pistol strapped in plain sight underneath her left arm added in no small measure to the safety and security of the local mail, as well as Bessie's grocery business and home. Bessie Kemp's intimidating demeanor and reputation might have been enough in ordinary times to scare away most prospective gentlemen suitors, but these were not ordinary times. These were the tougher days of the Great Depression, a time when a woman of Bessie Kemp's character and income held a premium value. Consequently, she was not infrequently propositioned by some of the community's leading widowers and bachelors. Though flattered by these attentions, Bessie scorned them all. Not the least of her concerns was her son Lamar, who she fondly called Baby. Lamar was a mean, lazy boy, spoiled rotten by his mother. Bessie knew that most men would want to take a razor strap to the boy in short order, and this she was not about to allow. Nokomis was a sparsely populated rural community, and Bessie Kemp knew everybody who lived there. At least she thought she did. That's why she was somewhat perplexed when she received a letter addressed to one J.T. Lambert, General Delivery, Nokomis, Alabama. The letter was marked, "Hold for pickup." Bessie inquired of everyone who came into the store if they knew anything about this J.T. Lambert fellow, but no one she asked had any notion of who he was. A week or so passed, and just when Bessie was about to relegate the letter to the undeliverable bin, a man walked in and declared himself to be J.T. Lambert himself. "I don't believe I know you," Bessie inquired suspiciously. "Are you from around here?" "Nope, just passing through," J.T. Lambert replied. "I'm from New York. I'm here looking for my brother, Winston. My twin brother, actually. Winston lost all his money in the stock market crash, and it seemed like he got all messed up in the head after that. He took to riding the rails looking for work." The last I heard from my brother was almost a year ago. He sent me a letter postmarked from a town near here called Atmore. I've asked around Atmore, but have found no one who remembers seeing him. Quite frankly, I'm worried that something might have happened to my brother." J.T. Lambert went on to explain that he and his brother had been business partners in New York prior to the big crash, and both had once been financially prosperous. He had been lucky, he said. The market was getting a little too crazy for him in the summer of 1929, and he had cashed in his substantial stock holdings only months before the crash in October. Winston had not been so lucky. He lost everything in the crash. In a state of despondency, Winston had left his wife and 4 children in the care of his bachelor brother, J.T., and had hopped a freight train headed south to look for work elsewhere. In the letter Winston Lambert had mailed from Atmore, the only communication anyone had received since his departure, Winston had sounded more optimistic about his life and said he hoped to return home soon. When months passed and Winston did not show up or write again, J.T. decided to go looking for him. "This letter you've been holding for me must be from Winston's wife, Agnes," J.T. Lambert said. The poor woman's worried sick about him, as am I. Bessie Kemp listened with great interest to J.T. Lambert's story. He was a tall, thin man, appearing to be in his early 50s, and Bessie found him most handsome and appealing. His manner of speech reflected a good education, and his suit and shoes were well fitted and of the best fashion, of the latest fashion. Clothes one might see in New York City, but never here in Nokomis, Alabama. J.T. reached into his inside breast pocket and pulled out an envelope, from which he extracted a photograph of his brother posing with his wife and children. They were all smiling and happy. He handed the picture over the counter to Bessie. "I know there's not much chance of it," he said, "but have you seen my brother around here?" Bessie took the picture and looked at it. The man in the photograph looked remarkably like the man standing in front of her. Naturally, her thoughts turned to the man she had killed almost a year earlier. But the man had not been recognizable as he lay bloody and mutilated on Bessie's floor, and she saw no need to mention the incident, which would surely alienate this handsome man standing before her. Handing the picture back to J.T. Lambert, Bessie smiled sympathetically. "I'm sorry. I've never seen this man," she said. "Until now," she added, "the two of you look alike." "Yes, Winston and I were very close," J.T. Lambert replied, putting the photograph back in his pocket and lowering his head for a moment. He finally sighed and said, "Well, thank you anyway, Miss—" "Just call me Bessie," she said, smiling sweetly. "Yes, well, thank you, Bessie," he said. I didn't expect you would have seen him, but I had to ask. I guess I'll be going." Just as J.T. Lambert turned to leave, Bessie blurted, Won't you stay for lunch? My son is off hunting squirrels, and I do hate to eat alone." J.T. Lambert stayed for lunch with Bessie that day, and returned again the next day, and the next, and the next. Their lunches turned into a regular event in the days that followed, and some changes started to come over Bessie. She quit wearing her big shoulder holster and her pistol when J.T. Lambert came to visit. She let her hair down onto her shoulders and started painting her lips and dabbing her cheeks with a little rouge. When Lamar discovered this strange man eating lunch with his mother one day, and her all gussied up for the man, he behaved rudely and threatened to throw the man out. "Me and Mama killed the last man who broke into our house," Lamar boasted. "If you know what's good for you, you'll leave and won't come back." "Now, baby," Bessie cooed sweetly, "don't be rude to our guests. Why don't you just sit down and eat with us?" Yes, why don't you? J.T. Lambert said warmly. I'd like to hear more about this man you and your mother killed. Bessie sat silently as Lamar pulled up a chair, dipped himself a plate, and recited the details of the shooting. J.T. Lambert listened intently. When Lamar had finished, J.T. grunted, looked at Bessie, and said, Well, Bessie, you are quite a woman. In the days that followed, Lamar made a point of joining his mother and J.T. Lambert at their daily lunches. Lamar seemed as enchanted with this man as his mother was, and J.T. seemed to genuinely like Lamar. The two got along ideally, which pleased Bessie immensely. Sensing Bessie's discomfort over Lamar's story, J.P. asked neither of them any questions. In fact, he showed no further interest whatsoever in the incident. This struck Bessie as strange. Though she had hoped in the beginning to avoid any discussion of the incident, now that the cat was out of the bag, she felt sure he would eventually want to know more, perhaps to investigate the identity of the dead man, who would indeed have been his brother Winston. When she could stand the anxiety no more, Bessie decided to broach the topic directly with her new friend. Cupping his hand in hers, she pulled her chair close so that their knees touched, and looked directly into his eyes. J.T., she began, swallowing hard, I'm surprised that you've showed no curiosity about the man my son told you about. I did indeed kill the man who had broken into our home in the middle of the night. I know I should have told you myself about it, but I didn't want you to leave, and I was afraid you would be angry. The truth is, we never knew who that man was, but he could have been your brother Winston. J.T. smiled warmly and patted Bessie's hand lightly with his free hand. My dear Bessie, he replied kindly, did you think I did not know about the man from the beginning? I told you I had made inquiries, and the shooting incident is well known hereabouts. I was only waiting for you to tell me about it yourself. Oh, J.T., Bessie exclaimed, I am so sorry. I would give anything to make up for killing your brother. Anything. Anything? J.T. asked quizzically, lifting his brow. Yes, anything, Bessie repeated. Very well, J.T. said as he stood up and put on his hat to leave. Let me give the matter some thought. Bessie's mind was consumed with the strange conversation with J.T. Lambert, and it did not occur to her until late in the day that Lamar had not returned from hunting in the woods. It was almost dark when she found her son Lamar, that he had apparently tripped and fallen upon his shotgun. The accidental discharge had blown away most of Lamar's head. His body lay only a few feet from the buried site of Winston Lambert. J.T. Lambert never returned. Bessie Kemp was consumed with grief over the death of her son for several months, during which time she gave J.T. Lambert little thought. Then one day she spotted the letter from Agnes Lambert lying on her kitchen table. Suddenly feeling great empathy for this poor woman, whose grief she now shared, she decided to write Agnes a letter, sending it to the return address on the envelope. Dear Agnes, she wrote, your brother-in-law J.T. Lambert visited my home several months ago in search of his brother and your beloved husband, Winston. Having recently lost my only son to death, I wish to express my sympathies for the loss of your husband, Winston. Please convey my warmest regards to J.T. Several weeks later, Bessie received a reply from Agnes Lambert. Thank you for your sympathies, Agnes wrote, but I have no knowledge of anyone named Winston Lambert. My husband, J.T. Lambert, a wonderful husband and father to our children, who I knew since childhood, had 4 sisters and no brothers. J.D. did disappear from our lives some time ago, following tragic financial ruin. I received only one letter from him, postmarked from your location. saying he was much improved in his emotions and would be returning home soon. I answered my husband's letter, but have not heard from him again. I recently petitioned authorities to have my husband declared dead, which allowed me to remarry. J.T. was always a kindly, thoughtful man, and I felt sure he would understand. Extremely perplexed by Agnes Lambert's letter, Bessie made inquiries at the boarding house in Atmore where J.T. Lambert had claimed to be staying during his stay here. No one had ever heard of J.T. Lambert. She petitioned authorities to dig up the grave where the man she killed had been found. They found an empty canvas body bag, but no human remains. Bessie Kemp's grief over her son's death, magnified by this new mystery, never left her. She died less than a year later, as she sat in her rocker on her front porch with her big pistol across her lap. Her ample frame having shrunken to less than 100 pounds, doctors say she literally starved herself to death. The old Bessie Kemp store can be seen to this day, sitting among the weeds and scrub trees of Highway 31 in Nokomis. The building was never lived in or used for any other purpose following Bessie's death. One might think that subsequent landowners would have torn down the old building by now, but each time such a notion is considered, Bessie is said to appear sitting in her rocker with her big leather holster strapped across her shoulders, with her pistol sitting in her lap. It is a saying today as passers-by look toward the old dilapidated house where Bessie Kemp lived long ago and muse, in 1934, Bessie Kemp killed a man. In 1934, that man killed Bessie Kemp.